What's going on, everyone? Great Talon here, and today the prey is going to be Super Castlevania 4, one of my all-time favorite Castlevania games. So it's fall 1991. It is just a few months after the launch of the Super Nintendo console. And here we are with a brand new reimagining of the original Castlevania, which utilized almost every aspect of the SNES hardware to pump out some really nifty looking graphics as well as new gameplay mechanics that blew the past three games out of the water in certain aspects. This title, of course, has followed suit with what would be the trend for most named games on the Super Nintendo console at the time, with Super in the title of almost every game. And herein we have Super Castlevania 4. So is this Castlevania really that super and live up to its name, or is it a watered down remake of the original game in this series trying to bank off the popularity of the Super Nintendo at the time? Well, once again, let's grab our Simon Belmont alongside of our cross-shaped boomerangs, holy water, and trusty chain whips and hunt down Dracula's forces for the fourth time into the end of the series and see how it fares. So graphics and performance are up first. So Super Castlevania 4 to me seems to take a good chunk of advantage of the Super Nintendo's hardware at times, and as not only will you notice a revamped looking Simon Belmont, but the backgrounds and environments and character models alike are now more detailed more than ever than they were in the original NES games. Not only do the backgrounds look more detailed, but they have moving parts going on, such as turning cranks, cogs, and turnstiles that almost give off a sense of third-dimensional feeling. It is quite the spectacle to gaze at and makes me feel that they put extra tender, loving care into making the backgrounds really stand out, unlike that they have done before in the previous three games. From stages with moving rocks, disappearing and reappearing glistening treasure trove, mountains of gold, there is a plethora of eye candy to catch your eye throughout the course of the game. Not only that, but the character animations are more detailed now thanks to the 16-bit aspect and the capability of the SNES's hardware over the 8-bit NES predecessor. Simon can now swing his whip in more fluid motion as well as jumping that's feeling less rigid and more natural thanks to the fluidity of the graphics. Also, I noticed less of a slowdown and less frame dips than in Super Castlevania 4 over the previous three entries. Sure, it does occur when there's a lot happening on screen at once, but does not feel as intentionally distracting as it once did, which is a nice feeling and keeps the game flowing along nicely. A bit about the gameplay and the control. Continuing its trend of 2D platforming action, Super Castlevania 4 dials the mechanics up to 11 this time around. All of your core attributes and abilities are here, such as whipping enemies with that trusty Belmont whip and obtaining power-ups from candles you whip throughout the stages. But this time, some of the mechanics are tweaked for the better, so you can stand a better chance at surviving the long, dark night that is completely long, dark, and full of terrors.
For the night is dark and full of terrors. The night is dark and full of terrors.
For example, Simon can now swing his whip in 8 directions as opposed to just left or right as seen in previous games. If you hold the attack button down, you can even manipulate the whip in all directions using a directional pad while standing still to swat enemies away or pesky annoyances that coming your way on screen. This adds a tremendous amount of depth that actually, from a simple mechanic that really works out and takes advantage while taking on enemies. Let's say a bat or skeleton is jumping at you from the right. Instead of jumping out of the way to whip right, you can simply aim the directional pad up and to the right adjacent, and Simon will whip diagonally, dealing damage to the enemies and avoiding damage himself. It is such a simple yet useful mechanic that will become such a staple feature in most Castlevania games moving forward as well, and it is most welcome at any given time. Another new feature is Simon's ability to latch onto hooks that are present throughout certain levels that allow him to swing from them to reach new heights. It is another really cool aspect that works out well in most scenarios. There is a slight learning curve too to these new features that we will discuss in a moment in the control section, but once you get them down pat, you will be in for one heck of a ride. Also, in addition to hearts returning as a form of ammunition for your sub-weapons, there are also many more candles that have meat inside of them too to heal up on during the course of each stage, which lowers the frustration level quite a bit. Even during the final boss fight, since it is such a long and grueling fight, there are 1 or 2 parts between the final boss phases that he'll actually drop a piece of meat for you if you're quick enough to catch it from a glowing orb that is rotating around you. There's also a mini boss rush mode too that has the magical power, healing power of the meats in between each boss fight, which I thought was very well implemented and very Mega Man-like. The controls are much better than they were in the previous NES titles. Now you can move in more directions and more ample-like motions and movements. Jumping feels more organic, and you can even control the pitch of Simon while in the air at times to choose exactly where he lands, and to correct those slight fuck-up moments. Going up and down staircases too feels much less stiff and more natural as well. I did not find myself getting stuck on staircases as often as I did in the older Castlevania games, and which is a nice feeling for once. Also, like I stated before, there is a small learning curve with some of the new abilities, such as the grappling hooks, as well as grappling with your whip. You have to time it just right as well while you're using your whip and cracking it diagonally, which might take some adjusting to. But once you get the knack of it, you will become the ultimate demon slaying badass of the 15th century. Now a bit about the story. Super Castlevania 4 is essentially a retelling of the first initial Castlevania game on the NES. While it does not follow the stage and level design at all, and it's supposed to feel like a new game, it still does show some familiar faces in the enemies and bosses, such as the mummy boss fight that's from the previous Castlevania games. Frankenstein's monster makes a return as well, and of course, it wouldn't be a Castlevania game without Death making an appearance. Or the big man himself, Dracula. But the tale is pretty much the same as well. You're Simon Belmont and called upon by the order of the church, as your family's history is renowned for vanquishing the forces of darkness and has ridden Dracula and his masses for centuries. While there is yet again no real narrative, even in the form of text bubbles, old school Castlevania style has always been visual storytelling, and it works just as good in Super Castlevania 4 here. Throughout the game's 11 stages, you will encounter many of Dracula's minions in the form of lesser enemies and ending stage boss fights. And the variety here is quite vast. You will find yourself facing undead horse riders, jousting demons, gargoyles, three-headed serpents, and much, much more as you make your way through the levels of the game, which can take you up to about 5 or 6 hours, stretching to 7 if you take your time like I did. The delightful head-bobbing tunes of the classic Castlevania games are completely remixed here in the best way thought out possible. The main title theme feels refreshing and worthy of being presented so robustly on the Super Nintendo's hardware that really amplifies the monotone sounding tunes of the original titles on the NES into something a little more prolifically attuned and provides more clarity in the sound effects as well as the music alike. The sound effects also take the full advantage of the new Super Nintendo hardware, as you'll notice new sounding mechanisms, enemies, and player sounds, as well as richer weapon sound effects too along your journey. You'll even notice some of the gears and cogs sounding spot on as you attach yourself to hooks and grapple points that are holstered up and elevated to higher platforms. It's really the little intricacies like this that make an essential remake here a timeless classic into its own unique game that truly looks and sounds and feels like a brand new game in the series instead of a reimagining, and holds its own in that regard all the way through. Okay, now replay value, high, very high, it's high here. I had to yank myself away from the second playthrough after the credits rolled because it is really turned into my favorite old school 2D Castlevania game to date, through and through. I mean, honestly, I really have to say that I played the Game Boy Advance and DS titles of the two old 2D Castlevania games, like Circle of the Moon and Dawn of Sorrow. I really think I can now safely say that Super Castlevania 4 still holds the crown for me in regards to the best 2D Castlevania game out there. And it's that is really highly debatable, because seeing as though most of you fans out there are Symphony of the Night fans or Dracula X fans, and it's arguably, you guys say it's the best Castlevania game out there for most fans, but not for me, unfortunately. For me, it's this game right here, Super Castlevania 4. To the overall score, and is it worth your time? Which is why I'm going to have to give Super Castlevania 4 a whopping score of 9 oak stakes out of 10. Granted, there are no oak stakes in this game, I just felt like being cute at the moment. So yeah, Super Castlevania 4 is indeed not only a timeless classic, but it is indeed worth your time. All the way through and through, and should be played by any fan out there, or person interested, or who pretty much enjoys a good side-scrolling platforming romp with a decent enough challenge. Not too much of a challenge this time around. They did dial down that difficulty quite a bit. It's more about working the mechanics this time around that adds into the more challenge aspect. It has some really cool gameplay elements to make this castle treading experience smoother, faster, and more seamless than previous installments has ever dreamed of to this time. So with that being said, folks, that's my review of Super Castlevania 4. What did you think? If you like it, give it a thumbs up. Why not subscribe? Drop a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts. Let's get the conversation rolling. I'll be doing a lot more classic games like this. I'm thinking about purchasing the Sega Genesis collection next, so yeah, that might be coming coming soon. And in tandem with modern games, I'm going to be getting a bunch of other stuff like Crash Team Racing and a game called Judgment. A bunch of games coming up too. My Friend Pedro. I'm looking into a lot of different games. Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 is next month, so yeah, look out for all those. That being said, you guys have a great day, night, and beautiful life, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.